politically correct progressives who find race in everything, racial bias in everything, and gentlemen. Topic of this video will be affirmative action. I'm going to limit it to 2 issues. First, if you've talked to these frothing at the mouth progressives here on YouTube, you realize that many of them, they find racial bias against blacks and Hispanics and everything. But actually, in some cases, it's the other way around, especially when we consider admissions to colleges. We're going to go over comparing GPA and MCAT, medical college admission test scores, and GPAs for white, Asian, Hispanic, and black applicants to medical schools, and see if we can see a little racial bias in this one. First of all, for blacks, and again, all the links will be under the video as usual. First of all, for whites, rather. If you have a GPA of 3.4 to 3.59 and an MCAT score of 18 through 20, and that's not very good, whites were accepted at a 9.3% rate. I've got all those boxed in. I'll go over another one that's not boxed, but keep those in mind. Write them down if you have to. 9.3%. If you're white and you have a GPA, same GPA, 3.4 to 3.59, and an MCAT of 21 through 23, MCAT score of 21 through 23, which is still not very good, you were 11.5% of those applicants were accepted. If we lower the bar to 3.2 GPA to 3.39, for whites, if you have an MCAT score of 18 through 20, 10.7%. If your MCAT score is 21 through 23 and your GPA is 3.2 to 3.39, if you're white, 6.7% accepted. Now, if we raise it to the GPA of 3.4 to 3.59 and an MCAT of 27 through 29, 36% of whites were accepted. If we 3.2 to 3.39 GPA and an MCAT of 27 through 29, that's 23.8%. So keep those figures in mind. If we go to Asians, and you'll see actually the bias going the other way now. For Asians with a GPA of 3.4 to 3.59, and we'll do all 3 of these. If your MCAT score is 18 through 20, only 2.3 were accepted. If we raise the MCAT to 21 through 23, only 7.9% were accepted. If we raise it to 27 through 29 with that same GPA, 30% were accepted. So you can see how that is much lower than whites. If we go to a 3.2 to 3.39 GPA, you're Asian, and your MCAT score is 18 through 20, only 1.1 were accepted, 1.1%. 3.2 to 3.39 GPA and an MCAT of 21 through 23, only 3.3% were accepted. Those are the main 4, and then I threw this one in. 3.4 GPA to 3.59. If you're Asian and you have an MCAT score of 27 through 29, 30% were accepted. So you can see how they're accepted at a much lower level than whites are. If you're black applicant, and your GPA is 3.4 to 3.59 and your MCAT is 18 through 20, 11.1% of you were accepted, which is higher than whites. If we raise your MCAT to 21 through 23 and a 3.4 to 3.59 GPA, it's 43.8%, which is much, much higher than Asians or whites. Much, much higher. And if your MCAT is 27 through 29 and your GPA is 3.4 to 3.59 and you're black, 85.9% are accepted, which is a lot more, much higher than the rate for whites or Asians. Now if we go to 3.2 to 3.39 GPA, MCAT score of 18 through 20, for blacks it's 6.3%, so that's actually lower than it was for whites. But if we go to an MCAT of 21 through 23 and your GPA is 3.2 to 3.39, it goes up to 32.9%, so that's much higher, and that's actually not very good score or GPA. If you're going to medical school, you can see how that's much higher. For blacks, you can see how just proportionally blacks get accepted at a much higher rate than you would if you're, especially if you're an Asian or a white person. If you go to Hispanic, MCAT score of 18 through 20 and a GPA of 3.4 to 3.59, 34.7% were accepted, which is, again, much higher than the rate for whites or Asians. Raise the MCAT to 21 through 23 and a 3.4 to 3.59 GPA, it's 41.9%, which is much higher than whites or Asians. If you have an MCAT of 27 through 29 and you're Hispanic, 3.4 to 3.59 GPA, it's 68.7%. Now, if we go to a GPA of 3.2 to 3.39 and you're Hispanic, MCAT score of 18 through 20, 30.7% of Hispanics were accepted, which is much higher than the rate for whites or Asians, much, much higher. If you have an MCAT of 21 through 23 and a GPA 3.2 to 3.39 Hispanic, it's 28.1%. So you can see how in all those instances, if you're Hispanic or black, even being a subpar student, having an MCAT score that's not very good, you are far more likely to get accepted if you're Hispanic or black than you are, especially if you're Asian or white. Now, why is that? And that's going to lead to some problems, folks, because if you look at medical school graduation and attrition rates, what they did is they followed 3 different classes, 1987, 1992, and 1995, 10 years after they entered medical school. First off, the graduation completion rates, and you can see how these admission standards being lowered for certain groups is leading to a lower graduation rate, especially if you go up to the disparity becomes the largest in year 7. After 7 years, you still have a sizable group of African Americans, especially that group, not finishing medical school. If you look at the attrition rates, you can see how it's much, much higher. And this is for academic reasons only. Those who cited academic reasons for leaving medical school. You can see how the rate, especially for blacks, is much higher than Asians or whites. Now, you can say, oh, that's racist, you're being racist. No, I'm just pointing out the facts. And these standards where they're admitting more black / African American or Hispanic students who are obviously not prepared for this, that is leading to higher attrition rates for academic reasons. Now, this isn't alarming. I mean, these rates aren't extremely high, but you can see how it is contributing to attrition rates, because if they didn't have these affirmative action standards, whether they're official or unofficial, you probably see a lower attrition rate. But the facts sometimes hurt, and I know people get upset about it, but the facts are the facts. Again, I've got all the relevant information in the video. And last but not least, Andrew Coulson testified at a Senate hearing recently, and it focused on Senator Durbin was worried that African American or black students, whatever term you prefer, are more likely to be suspended than whites. And I'm a person who believes, unless the student is an absolute lost cause, out of school suspensions to a student who doesn't give a darn really don't do a lot of good, if you know what I mean, because they're just looking for a vacation anyway. Well, Senator Durbin was worried that racism was playing a role in whites or blacks being suspended more often, but the research by Joshua Kinsler indicates that if you are a black student at a predominantly white school, you get the same suspension as any other student for any particular offense than you would as a white student at that predominantly white school. The fact is that if you're a black student at a predominantly black school, you usually get a longer suspension or more severe punishment than a black student at a predominantly white school. So to link racism to the reason black students get longer suspensions and more severe punishments at school than whites, to say there's really no proof of that. Now, Andrew was careful to say that that doesn't mean there isn't racism involved in this somewhere and at some point, but broadly speaking, there isn't a conspiracy against black students at high schools. If you're a black student at a predominantly black school, you will get a more severe punishment than a black student at a predominantly white school. And the black students attending predominantly white schools typically get the same punishment for the same offense than a white student would get at that school. So progressives are supposedly wanting us to be colorblind, but they're the ones bringing up racism and favoring these educational quotas, which are backfiring. Actually, if you really were colorblind, you wouldn't be making this an issue constantly and autistically reciting, the race card and arguments attached to that, and you wouldn't be favoring these quotas at medical schools that are, whether they're official or not, are obviously hurting some people because you've got certain groups getting people into medical school who have no business being there. Have a nice day, and don't thank me now. I also wanted to quickly add, and I have these linked under there as well, Presidents Lyndon B. Johnson and John F. Kennedy would not approve of these racial quotas of showing favoritism towards a certain group because of the color of their skin. They would not approve of that. So you modern progressives, you're on the opposite side of two of your icons, Presidents Kennedy and Johnson.